Hi, my name's Chris Pells from idevtech.com, and in this video we're going to learn how to create a behavior using Microsoft AJAX extensions that can be attached to an ASP.NET server control. Now, to demonstrate how to create a behavior and attach it to a server control, I've created this sample website here. And before we get started looking at the details of what's entailed with creating that behavior, let's fire up this website and take a look at what it does and how the behavior works. So what I've done is created a simple web page sample here that has an image tag on it, and let me show you what it does and explain what the behavior is doing behind the scenes. Notice that when we move the mouse out of the image, move it back into the image, as soon as the mouse gets into the image is changed dynamically, and notice that the page didn't refresh, that we're dynamically changing the image. Now let me click on this same image and you'll notice we get yet a third image. I let the mouse button up and it reverts back to the original image. So the behavior that we're creating here allows different images to be shown based upon certain actions. In this case, the mouse moving over the image or a mouse down and a mouse up event. And that behavior is attached to a standard ASP.NET server-side image control. So let's go back here, close out the web page, and next we'll take a look at the functionality behind the scenes that makes this behavior work. Now that we've seen a demonstration of the behavior in action on a web page, let's take a look at the different pieces that make up the behavior in the project. First thing we'll look at is the server-side code, which is here in the app code folder, and we've created an extender called imageExtender.vb. We could have created this in C#. Let's open it up and see what's going on in the server-side code. First thing to note is we've created a namespace to separate the extender class from the rest of the functionality in the website so we don't have any collisions. And here we're creating a class called imageExtender, and that inherits from the AJAX library class extender control. If you're creating a behavior that is an extension for an ASP.NET server control, then you need to inherit from the extender control class. We're also placing an attribute on this class, target control type, which is specifying what type of control this image extender is associated with. And in this particular case, we're making it very generic. We're specifying just that the ASP.NET control that it's associated with is any type of control. First thing we have inside the image extender class are several private properties to store information that's used with the image extender behavior. We have 4 different values for types of URLs. We have a normal, a hover, an active, and a disabled image URL that are stored in these private variables. Then we have a series of properties defined for each of those private variables that gets and sets the values in the private variables. This one here is for the normal image, and then we have one for the hover image, active image, and disabled image. Next we have a method called getScriptReferences, and this is overriding a method in the base class that we inherited from. And essentially what script references does is it specifies what JavaScript files we need to include that are sent down to the client when our control is rendered. And this can be one JavaScript file, such as the case we have here. We're sending down the imageBehavior.js JavaScript file by creating an instance of this the script reference object, setting the path to map to where that JavaScript file is located, and then we're returning an array which contains, in this case, one reference object. Now this is an IEnumerable that we're returning so that we could have multiple reference objects here if we had multiple JavaScript files. The last method here in the server-side class is a method called getScriptDescriptors, and essentially what this method does is it defines how to render an instance of the client class down in the browser, or I should say it's how to render it and then it's sent down to the browser. And in this particular class, what we need to do is to create 4 different properties in our client object that contain the corresponding values stored here in the server class of the different images. Now, once we create this descriptor object, add the 4 properties, we're then returning that from this method as an array. Very much like we saw with the references up above here, this is an IEnumerable so that we can return multiple descriptors if we wanted to. In this particular case, we're only returning one descriptor. So that's what makes up the server-side code for creating our image behavior extender. Now let's take a look at what happens in the client-side JavaScript. So let's open up the client-side JavaScript file located over here in the scripts folder called imagebehavior.js and see what functionality is in it that's sent down and used on the client side. First thing we want to notice up here on line 2 is that we're calling a register namespace method on the type object and defining a namespace called behaviors. Now, inherently, JavaScript doesn't have the concept of namespaces, so one of the things that's been implemented in the Microsoft AJAX library is the ability to register namespaces and have them available in your JavaScript code, so the paradigm is a little more similar to what you're used to coding in the .NET framework. However, it's important to point out that this is JavaScript, it's running on the client, but we actually have an implementation of namespaces here that we can use. So first we define the image behavior class, and we do a little initialization to associate this instance of the image behavior with the corresponding element, HTML element on the page that it is being associated with. Then we set the 4 properties, which you recall we specified in the service descriptors method in the client-side code. We're setting them to null. Then we're creating what's called a prototype for the image behavior class. If you're not familiar with the concept of creating a prototype in JavaScript, essentially think of it as a way to define all of the parts of a class or the methods that make up objects that make up your image behavior JavaScript class. The first that we're defining is the initialize method here. We're doing a call to the base initialize method. Then we're setting up, starting on line 29 here, several event delegates and the event handlers that are associated with them for the different types of events that we want to handle down on the page when this behavior is running. They're the mouse over, mouse out, mouse down, and mouse up events. And then we have a corresponding handler underscore on mouse over, for example, that is being associated with the on mouse over handler. Same thing for the mouse out, mouse down, and mouse up. Then what we have to do is add these handlers to the HTML element. And we use add handlers here. This is what's called a shortcut method in the AJAX library. That's denoted by the $sign here in front of the method name. And a shortcut is essentially just an easier way, an easier syntax to implement a desired action. So what's happening here is that we're taking the 4 event handlers that we just defined and associating them with the element, in this case the element that we have associated the behavior with. Last thing we're doing here in the initialize method is we're setting the image for the element based upon whether or not the element is enabled or not. The next thing we have is a dispose method for some cleanup. We're using another shortcut method called clear handlers to dissociate the event handlers from the current element, and then we're calling the base dispose method. Next, we create a series of event delegates, and in the first one you can see it's for underscore on mouse over, and in this what we're doing essentially is we're checking to see whether the element exists and whether or not the element's disabled, and if this is true then we're changing the source value of the source property for the image to the hover image. And we have corresponding event delegates here for the other events, the on mouse out, on mouse down, and on mouse up, all of which change the image based upon certain conditions. Next, we have a series of property definitions for getting and setting the values of each of our private variables. And notice here the naming convention is very important. Notice that the name of the get and set is get underscore normal image URL. And this needs to match the name of the private variables that were defined back in the server-side code, and then you're actually just prefixing either the word get or set to the variable name, and this allows the Ajax library to map these properties to the proper variables, etc. So we have property get sets for the normal image, hover image, active image, and the disabled image. Then here we have an optional JSON serialization method that we've defined in case you're interested in working with JSON. Down in line 155, we are calling the register class method to register this class that we've just created with the base type, which is a sys.ui.controls, and it just should note that this is a namespace and class in the Microsoft Ajax library that we're deriving from, so essentially we're extending the base control class. The last thing we have on line 158 is a call to the notify script uploaded method of the application object that lets the application know that the script has been properly loaded. If you are creating JavaScript files in the Microsoft Ajax library or with the use of the Microsoft Ajax library, it's very important that you include this line at the end of every script file so that the Ajax library knows that you have loaded this script properly. So that's the client-side JavaScript in the imageBehavior.js file. Let's go now look at the default ASPX page. Now we've seen the two major pieces that make up the creation of a behavior for an ASP.NET control. We saw the server-side code in the imageExtender.vb file. Then we saw the JavaScript code for the client in the imageBehavior.js file. Let's take a look at default ASPX and see how you implement a behavior and associate it with an ASP.NET control on a web page. The page is pretty simple. The first thing up here on line 3 is that we are registering the namespace that contains our behavior, hti.ajax.behaviors, and we're associating that with a tag prefix called sample. Down here on line 11, we have a script manager tag. It's important to note that any Ajax enabled web page needs to have a script manager tag, so all the base functionality is there and available to you. Then on line 12, we have our ASP.NET control, an image control, and with it we've given it an ID of image 1. Down on line 14 through 16 we have the tag for our image extender behavior, and in that we are specifying the control ID, target control ID that is, of the ASP control that we're associating the behavior with, in this case image 1, which points back here to the image 1 tag. Then we have the 4 different attributes that specify the URLs of the different types of images that our image extender behavior uses in association with the ASP image tag. So that's it for the default ASPX page. Before we fire up the sample web page and look at the behavior in action again, I just want to point out a couple more things here in the project. Here are all the 4 images that we use in this behavior on the web page. And then in the web.config file, you'll notice that there are a number of sections here related to the Microsoft AJAX library. And what I wanted to mention is that I didn't have to add these manually. When I selected the ASP.NET enabled AJAX website project type initially, the project template automatically inserted all of these tags into the web.config file. I encourage you to go off, take a look at the documentation about what some of these tags do in case you need to change it. And especially you might want to take a look at the authentication and profile services, which are part of the AJAX library. They can be very useful in your projects. So now let's fire up the sample website and take a look at the behavior in action again. So let's start up the website and see our sample page with the behavior in action again. So the page starts up and we have our normal image being displayed. As I move the mouse cursor over the image, the mouse over event fires and the behavior changes the image to the sunset image. When I click on the button, the mouse down event fires, changing it to the water lilies. When I let the mouse button up, the mouse up event fires, changing it back to the initial normal image. So now that we've seen all the different pieces that are part of creating a behavior that you associate with an ASP.NET control, we saw the server-side code, we saw the client-side JavaScript. Hopefully you have a pretty good idea of what's going on behind the scenes as you see this behavior in action associated with the ASP.NET image control. Hope you've enjoyed the video, learned a bit about how to create a behavior and associate it with an ASP.NET control. I encourage you to go off, take a look at the ASP.NET AJAX documentation. There's a lot of great things there that hopefully you can use in your projects. Thanks very much.